Your house is located here,
But you're being charged like your house is located here. Why is that? Well, let's talk about it.
In today's video, I'm going to show you exactly why you're getting that kind of pricing and what you can do to lower this pricing. So if you are a Missouri homeowner that is struggling with flood insurance pricing, then this video is for you. So let's get started. But before we do, make sure to share, subscribe, and like the channel below. Hi, I'm Chris with the Flood Insurance Guru. More than a decade ago, I bought a house in a high-risk flood zone just like this right here. I almost lost it because of high flood insurance premiums. My real estate agent didn't have the information they needed. My lender wasn't sure what to do. I was kind of left on an island. And that's why I've been helping Missouri homeowners like yourself for the last decade solve these problems. So today, let's talk about why are you being charged flood insurance when you really live here? In order to really answer that question, we've got to understand how flood insurance premiums are built for Missouri properties. And we need to look at the National Flood Insurance Program, and we need to look at private flood insurance. We need to understand one thing, and that is the impact of flood zones. Remember, the National Flood Insurance Program no longer uses flood zones to determine rates in the state. Some private companies still do, about 25 to 30% of the time. This doesn't mean your flood map does not. Remember, we're talking about flood zone. We're talking about like flood zone A or AE. We're talking about areas where flood insurance is going to be required if you have a mortgage. In order to understand this though, we've also got to talk about what are the three most common flood zones we see in the state of Missouri. Whether you're on the Missouri River, there's three basic types of flood zones that we see in the state of Missouri. We're talking about flood zone X. Now this can be an area where it's going to be considered to be low risk area, your 500-year flood area. If you don't have a mortgage or mortgages that requiring flood insurance, they're going to call this low risk. This typically means that flood insurance is optional. But you've got to remember, in Missouri, with flood zone X, more than 30% of claims come out of this area. So just remember that. These are also considered to be non-special flood hazard areas since a mortgage company is not requiring it. Flood zone A and AE, these are areas that might be right along these areas of the Mississippi, the Missouri River, Lake of the Ozarks, all these different areas throughout Missouri. These are areas where if you have a mortgage, more than likely flood insurance is going to be required. So premiums can have a big impact on your wallet. Typically the big difference between flood zone A and AE in Missouri is that flood zone A is not going to have a base flood elevation. This means that it really hasn't been determined what the exact FEMA flood level is. This means the chances of changing your flood zone like I did more than a decade ago could be lower in an area like flood zone A. You could also see higher difference in pricing. But remember, typically flood zone A, AE, and X are not impacting your rates, at least with the National Flood Insurance Program in Missouri. But with many private companies, it still is. So if these types of flood zones in Missouri are not impacting your flood insurance rates, what exactly is impacting your flood insurance rates? Well, I'm glad you asked. The National Flood Insurance Program might actually be a little bit easier to understand here. So let's talk about these different things they use to determine your rates. They're looking at things like distance to water, the elevation above your flood level. The higher you are above that 100-year flood level, let's just say, for example, you live in flood zone AE and they say your base flood is 100 feet. They think that that's the level that FEMA flooding could come to. The higher you are above that, the lower your flood insurance rates could be. That's how elevation has an impact. Same thing with distance to water, especially if you live near a floodway like this could right here can be considered. Remember, the floodway is going to be the overflow area of any water source, whether it's a dried up creek, a lake, or river. The closer you are to that floodway, the bigger the impact it's going to have on your flood insurance premiums in Missouri. Now, historically, the National Flood Insurance Program really didn't impact this much, but now they do with the Risk Rating 2.0 that came out a few years ago. Floodways have a big impact. And when it comes to private flood insurance, about 75% of private flood insurance companies in Missouri won't even insure a property in a floodway. So it's important that you understand that. So this is how elevation and distance to water have an impact. Then we could take a look at the type of flooding frequency. For example, in Missouri over the last few years, we've had a lot of flood events, whether you're in Chester Flats, you're in St. Charles, or you're just up in St. Louis area. All these different areas have been hit really hard with those rainfall floods. We see it time and time again. That's how the type of flooding and flooding frequency can impact your rates with the National Flood Insurance Program. Then, one of the biggest factors that we're seeing right here in 2025 and beyond has been the replacement cost of your property. Remember, this is what FEMA thinks it takes to replace your property. So let's just say you have two properties next to each other. One's got a replacement cost of $450,000. Another one's got $800,000. But both of them are only getting $250,000 $250,000 from the federal government, the $800,000 one's going to have a significantly higher rate because of replacement costs. Even though you're not getting more coverage, I know that's hard to understand, you're still getting charged more. And this typically is the case with the National Flood Insurance Program or private flood insurance. So understanding, working with a local insurance agent in Missouri that understands replacement costs is going to be very valuable for you in understanding how it's going to impact your premiums. For example, if you've got a replacement cost estimator that is wrong by 20%, and we just saw this last week, they could have a major impact on your premiums. So you want to understand that when you're taking a look at this in Missouri, understand what it is that you control. We talked about distance to water, the type of flooding, flooding frequency, replacement cost, elevation, all these different things that have an impact on your rate. What doesn't impact your rate typically though are flood zones with the National Flood Insurance Program, but with private, to about 25 to 30%. If you live in Missouri and you're out there shopping for flood insurance, whether you're purchasing it for the first time or your renewal is coming up, I want to save you some time in this video. And that is, if you have a National Flood Insurance Program policy, all your rates should be the same no matter where you are, unless you're taking over someone else's policy. Like I did. This is called a policy transfer, a policy assumption. I transferred my policy to someone else who is buying my property. That's really the only time that's going to be an exception. But if you're shopping for flood insurance here in Missouri for private, that's a different ball game. You see, not all private flood insurance is the same. A lot of these are built on what's called surplus lines or not admitted, which means you have different contracts with reinsurance companies like Lloyd's of London. This means you may have 3 different quotes. One might be $4,000, $400, $800. We see it every day. In fact, on average, the flood premiums that we see in the state of Missouri are about $800 for $250,000 in coverage and $100,000 in contents, compared to your national average with the National Flood Insurance Program, which is closer to $1,000. So just keep that in mind, that if you're paying, let's say, above $1,200 a year for your property in Missouri, then more than likely you could be overpaying. And you could click in the description of this video, check out our flood risk tool, and we could give you a quick estimate on basically what you're paying based on your risk. Because that's what they look at now, is this flood risk. And that's the reason why we have this flood risk score built for you if you're here in Missouri. So these are the ways that flood insurance premiums are impacted. If you're ready to take the next steps to lower your flood insurance premiums, in the description of this video, you can download our guide to lowering your flood insurance premiums here in Missouri. I'm Chris with the Flood Insurance Gear, and I want to say thank you for watching today's video for Missouri homeowners when it comes to flood insurance premiums. Don't forget to share, subscribe, and like the channel below.